Okay, very good morning to everyone who's gathered here today on Mother's Day. A warm welcome from Pune Breast Care. Our session today is on breast cancer genes. And my guest participant today and co host is Dr. Meenal Agarwal. She is a gynecologist and geneticist by training. Welcome, Dr. Meenal. You are always my first call when it comes to anything genetics related to breast cancer. Lovely to have you here today. Can you tell us what is it exactly that you do, a little bit of your background?
Thank you, Dr. Pranjali. Good morning, everybody, and happy Mother's Day to you all. So, I was trained initially as a gynecologist who switched over to medical genetics, and I'm practicing medical genetics for about 12 to 13 years now. So, apart from other reproductive genetics, I do take care of the genetics part in the cancer cases. I do counsel them, provide them a pre-test counseling, and actually interpret the genetic test reports, talk to the physician, take the clinical inputs, and make a kind of an interpretation which makes sense to them. For this genetic testing, I am affiliated with this organization called GenePath Diagnostics, under which we provide all kind of genetic testing, and also to the ladies who are suffering with breast cancers and the breast cancer-related genetics. I'm working as adjunct professor in the Department of Medical Genetics, D.Y. Patil Medical College also. So thank you, Dr. Pranjali, for having me here, and good morning, everybody, once again.
Always a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Meena. Welcome. And most of you know me. I am a breast cancer surgeon. I have trained in the US where, genetics was very much a part of breast cancer care. And when I came back to India 7, 8 years ago, this was relatively a nascent field. And over the last few years, it's been a very heartening progress that has occurred in this field per se, where our testing partners have made genetic testing a lot more accessible, affordable to our Indian patients here. Simultaneously with that, surgical techniques have evolved to where when we are offering preventive risk reduction surgery to our patients, techniques for this surgery have also evolved dramatically, where we have accumulated increasing experience in prophylactic mastectomies, where the procedure is no longer a mutilating mastectomy operation where a woman has to walk around flat chested. What we're doing today is what we can consider as breast replacement surgery. So even in the surgical field, there have been tremendous leaps and bounds as far as prophylactic surgery is concerned. A lot more drugs have become now available, specifically helping gene mutation carriers in fighting cancers. And so a lot has evolved over the field. Yet the need to do this discussion as a common platform for both medical personnel as well as patients is that we're still not where we need to be in terms of who is being offered testing. There are a lot of patients who simply don't know that there is something called as a genetic risk to breast cancer. Often oncologists don't necessarily have institutional pathways that offer genetic counseling and testing as a streamlined program, and are hence hesitant to discuss this topic of genetic risk and testing with their breast cancer patients and people who do have a strong family history independent of whether they have cancer or not. So there is a lot that can be done to improve access to testing. And hence the goal today of doing this session on Mother's Day was that, we've had these heartening cases that we have seen recently where a mom has tested positive for a gene mutation. Her mother had breast cancer. Um, Her mother had never been tested, so she never had access to knowing her genetic information. And now she is actually herself being treated for an advanced breast cancer, which did not get picked up early. Yet she underwent testing so that she could help, guide her daughter about her risk. And when we tested this patient for a gene mutation, found the mutation, we brought her daughter into the conversation, we counseled her, we tested her, and she fortunately is not a carrier of the same gene that runs in her family. So this was extremely reassuring information. It was a step taken by the mother to guide her daughter correctly, and this sort of triggered a discussion to actually opening up this topic as a Mother's Day session. So welcome to all of you who have joined us here today. And let's talk a little bit about housekeeping rules before we move on. Okay, so the goal for today's session is to conduct an introductory session on breast cancer genetics. It's not meant to be providing any detailed, individual guidance, because for that we need to make sure that any individual who wants to undergo genetic counseling for their particular case should undergo that with a trained genetic counselor or an oncologist experienced in the subject matter. So um, this session is designed only for general information. um, we do have disclosures that Dr. Meenal Agarwal, as she said, she is working with a genetics diagnostic company. My center, Pune Breast Care, we do offer genetic counseling and testing with the same company, which is GenePath Diagnostics. We do intend to record this session and make it available to those who were not able to attend the session live. So there are a lot of myths when it comes to genetic testing and about heredity of breast cancer in general. So one common thing that we see is women often assume that if nobody in my family has had breast cancer, I'm not going to get it. This is a very common myth. And this is probably more dangerous than all other myths put together, because every so often I find a woman who has a large lump. She's clearly had it for several months, sometimes a year or two, and she hasn't spoken about it simply because she thinks that breast cancer happens only to people who have a family history. So although she has a lump, she has symptoms of breast cancer, she thinks if there's no family history, I'm safe. And that's a very, very common myth. And we need to dispel that myth. Another myth is that, breast cancer, when I ask women whether they have a family history of breast cancer or ovarian cancer, and breast and ovarian cancer often run together in families when there are gene mutations, women often say, well, there's no history on my mother's side. But the truth is, you inherit 50% of your genes from your dad. So your history from your father's side is going to be just as important. The other common myth is, why do genetic testing to assess my risk of future breast cancer if I've already developed one breast cancer? How is it relevant to me? I'm already undergoing testing and I'm already undergoing treatments. Why is genetic testing relevant to me? We will come to that in the future discussion. But if you have a genetic mutation that is contributing to your breast cancer, there may be changes we may make to your medical treatments and surgical treatments, and it is relevant to your family members as well. Another common misconception is, breast cancer genetic testing does not apply to men. That is not true at all. Men can very much be carriers of the BRCA genes responsible for breast and ovarian cancer. And in men, these genes also increase risk of prostate cancer and to some extent increase risk of pancreatic cancer. So it's not just because you don't have breasts and ovaries does not mean you can't undergo genetic testing for breast cancer. In fact, men actually do have some breast tissue and can even develop breast cancer, and we'll come to that as well. Another common misunderstanding is, breast cancer risk skips generation. That is not true at all. So when women ask about breast cancer risk, often every woman who's had cancer will say, why did I get it? And we know there are a plethora of factors. Some are intrinsic and some are extrinsic, which are contributing to risk of breast cancer. Your genetic risk, the genes that you're made of, you are born with. And there is not much that you can do about this risk. The elements of risk that you can control are related to your lifestyle when it comes to exercise, diet. And we're not going to go into details about risks of breast cancer and how to manage them. You can refer to some of our other videos on our channel to go through that. But today, the risk that we're specifically going to focus on is the genetic and intrinsic risk of breast cancer. So, Dr. Meenal, my first question to you, and this question gets posed to a lot of us, and is a very general question, is breast cancer a hereditary disease? What would you say to that?
So if I first talk about what is hereditary. So hereditary, if I say in a simple term, any condition any trait, any disease, which is passed on from one generation to other, from parents to their children. That is what is hereditary is. So breast cancer, as we know, is an adult onset condition. And like other adult onset conditions like hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, this is quite common in our population. So it is not uncommon that to see one or more family members to have been affected with breast cancer or related cancer like ovarian cancer. But having said that, majority of these breast cancers, up to 85 to 90%, there is no intrinsic genetic risk that you just told in the previous slide, which is passed on from one generation to other. Most of these cases, 85 to 90% of breast cancers, are caused by factors which are still unknown. That's the previous slide Dr. Pranjali presented. Only 5 to 10% of the cases, there is an intrinsic, genetic, hereditary risk, or whatever you call it, which is passed on from parents to children.
Right. Thanks. And you know what has happened is because 85% of women we know there is no significant genetic factor, this 5 to 10% group sometimes gets largely ignored. And
Correct.
today
Yeah.
we actually want to talk about this 5 to 10% of breast cancers, that we do need to be aware who they are, what we can do for them, and how they should protect themselves and their future generations from this hereditary risk.
And how do we identify them? Those 5 to 10%. Yeah.
So, but broadly speaking, what are genes, Dr. Meenal? Like when women talk, you know, it would be great if we could just eliminate the problem, take away the genes that are causing breast cancer. But what can you tell us in brief? I know this is a vast topic, but what can you briefly tell us? What are these genes? Where are they located? What are?
So if I simply tell this to this audience, that every human body, each one of us is made of trillions of cells. And each cells has a coded information in the form of a genetic material. You can compare it with a large encyclopedia, which has about 46 volumes and 20,000 chapters. These 46 volumes can be compared with the 46 chromosomes. 23 chromosomes are inherited from mother and 23 from father. And these 20,000 chapters, I'm calling it as these are genes. So each cell of our body has this information in the form of an encyclopedia. And this genetic information defines all our structure, function, disease states from birth till death. Some of these changes are inherited from our previous generation, from our mother, from our father. And some of this genetic information is evolved as we grow up, because when the cells divide, we grow up. And this encyclopedia, this whole genetic information, 20,000 chapters, 46 volumes, they are copied. And sometimes this copy leads to errors. And these errors can be in the form of spelling. You can imagine a spelling in a word, spelling mistake in a word is missing, or a line is missing, paragraph is missing. And these errors in the spelling, that's what it's called as mutation, a genetic defect in a simple terminologies. So in a genetic defect is an error in your genetic code, which puts you at higher risk for certain disease status. So one of these 20,000 genes, there are few genes, about 20 genes that may be related to your breast cancer or ovarian cancer risk. Did I explain to you, Dr. Pranjali? Did I explain to this audience?
Put. I know this is a vast subject, but I think it really helps the comparison which you've made very lucidly, that, you know, it's a spelling mistake happening at a cell level, where within your cell, it's like 23 volumes of an encyclopedia getting copied, and somewhere that spelling mistake is what is causing gene defects. So thanks. That's as lucidly as you can put it in a minute. So what are the breast cancer genes though? What are the genes that cause these hereditary breast cancers?
So as we were talking, that in your encyclopedia, in your complete genetic information inside every cell, there are about 20,000 genes or chapters. Out of these 20,000 genes or chapters, there are about 20 genes or 20 chapters in which, if there is a spelling mistake, if there is an error, if there is a genetic defect, this may put somebody at higher risk of developing breast cancers. And out of these 20 genes, the two most genes which are talked about, which are most important, is BRCA1, that stands for breast, BR taken from breast and CA taken from cancer. So BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which are mostly responsible for 85 to 90% of genetic related breast cancers. Always remember, this is a genetics related breast cancer that is anyways 10% of all breast cancers. But if you talk about genetic testing, these are the first two genes which should be tested for.
Thank you. And when it comes to what actually happens if you inherit a defective copy or a harmful copy of this BRCA gene, what actually happens at the cell level is, normal functioning BRCA genes are simply making proteins that repair DNA damage, and DNA damage keeps happening at multiple points when cells divide. And usually the body has several repair mechanisms to fix these DNA defects. And now if you inherit a defective copy of a repair mechanism, that makes you more prone to developing cancers. And as far as the BRCA genes are concerned, they are usually functioning in the breast and ovaries, and those are the cancers that we are going to see more and more of if you have a defective copy of a BRCA gene. Would that be a fair statement, Dr. Meena? And also, not to forget, risk of prostate cancer and partially increasing risk of pancreatic cancer in people who do have these gene defects.
Also, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Pranjali. As Dr. Pranjali told initially that cancer, especially the breast cancer, can have multiple mechanisms. But ultimate mechanism is that something is going wrong in one cell of your breast. So if that cell is already having a harmful mutation of BRCA, the chance of accumulating or getting other damages becomes very, very high. And that's why that person has much higher risk for breast cancer than other women around you.
Yeah. And often, people think, well, if I inherit one bad copy from my mother, but if I have one good copy from my father, is that still going to be a problem? And in some gene defects, it's not. Yet in this particular condition, even one defective copy is sufficient to cause the problem, what we call in medicine as an autosomal dominant disorder. So when it comes to genetic tests for breast cancer, these are broadly of two types. And it's important to distinguish between these because women often will get confused. Like when I ask a woman, let's say she's had a strong family history of breast cancer, she's come to me after getting treated somewhere else to discuss this. And when I ask her, well, have you undergone genetic testing? She may say, yes, I've undergone genetic testing. And often they are referring not to germline or blood testing for these gene defects. They're talking about genetic tests which were done on their tumor sample. And this is a completely different chapter from what we are discussing today. Genetic testing that is done on tumor samples are usually done, they're either predictive assays to see whether a certain type of breast cancer we can avoid chemotherapy, how much is the benefit of chemotherapy, can we treat with hormone therapy alone, or certain groups of cancer where we want to find targets to plan treatment details for that specific patient. And this testing is separate from what we are going to talk about today. Today, we are going to talk specifically about the right-sided column. If you have a hereditary gene mutation, it's present in all cells of your body. So you can test any tissue, you can test your blood, you can test your saliva, and you're going to get the same result. And these are what I've listed here are the various genetic tests that we commonly do for hereditary risk assessment in breast and ovarian cancer syndromes. One can do a limited testing for just looking at BRCA1 and 2, like Dr. Meenal said, that these are the most common mutations found. One can do an extended NGS panel today. And with emerging technology, the cost of testing these additional genes in the same setting is not much increased compared to doing the limited testing. So some women, we may discuss doing the extended panels. And then there are some cases where we are strongly suspecting a BRCA1 and 2 mutation, but we haven't found it in conventional, what we call as NGS testing. And this is more in discussion for the medical, doctors who are attending this session. That we have been able to do MLPA and copy number variations and find these BRCA defects that pertain to these large gene rearrangements or copy number variations, which were not found by conventional NGS testing. So this collaboration between the geneticists and the oncologists, putting together this clinical history and the complete picture to guide the patient to do the right kind of test is very important. This is not something that, you go for a regular health check and you tell them either I want only my blood sugar and hemogram checked, or I'm going to do the whole, thyroid and lipid and everything and just do it for me. This is something that we need to go in a very stepwise manner to be able to utilize this information correctly. So who should actually undergo genetic counseling and testing? So in our practice, and this is not my guess or yours, there are definite guidelines that are written by an organization called NCCN, and there are various other oncological associations which have published their guidelines. Who are the patients who definitely should be offered genetic counseling and testing? Young breast cancer patients who get diagnosed with breast cancer before the age of 50, patients who've had multiple breast cancers over their lifetime, especially if the first breast cancer was at a younger age, patients who have breast cancer on both sides, bilateral breast cancer, patients who have breast cancer but have had relatives who have close blood relatives who have had breast, ovarian, or other cancers that fit the pattern. If a certain woman or a man is completely asymptomatic, they don't have cancer, but they do have a strong family history where multiple members within one side of the family tree have been affected with breast, ovarian, and similar cancers. Male breast cancer, independent of all factors, is recommended to undergo genetic counseling and testing. A certain type of breast cancer, what we call as triple negative breast cancer, if it occurs in a woman younger than 60, we would advise them counseling and testing. I do want you to take a minute and review the criteria that are on this slide. It doesn't mean that just because you don't meet one of these criteria, you cannot undergo counseling and testing. You may not exactly fit this. There are often exceptions to this situation. Somebody may have very limited access to their own family history. A breast cancer patient may come to me and say she's adopted and she doesn't have access to the family history side of the information. So, but those in this audience who are reviewing this session or the recording, and you meet these criteria, but you have not had an opportunity to undergo counseling and testing, I would strongly urge you to make an appointment for a genetic counseling session with me or Dr. Meenal. We'll share our contact information towards the end of the presentation. But this is really important. And you may have been treated for breast cancer 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when genetic testing was not as accessible and available. And one of the reasons I got prompted to do this session today was on the occasion of Mother's Day, was I recently had a breast cancer patient who's being treated right now for an advanced cancer. And she felt, her mother had had breast cancer, her grandmother had had breast cancer. And this was a matter of, fate. And she was waiting for this to happen to her, and it happened to her. And now she is getting treated for this cancer, but she decided, well, I am going to undergo testing. She underwent testing. She did test positive for the breast cancer gene as we expected her to. And we then counseled her about the risk to her next generation. Her daughter, who was an adult, was able to come in for a counseling session. We gave her the option to undergo testing after discussing all the risks and limitations of testing. She underwent testing and she is not a carrier of the gene. So this brought tremendous relief to the mom. Like both mom and daughter were in tears, learning that somewhere this chain of transmission had stopped. And now the risk to the daughter of developing breast cancer is as much as any other average woman who should still take care of herself, should undergo regular breast exams, should undergo annual mammography after the age of 40. And this was a very heartening story because now the daughter doesn't have to live with the constant stress that, okay, this is a event that is simply going to happen to me and I have no control over it. There are other patients who have not been as fortunate. So they have inherited the gene defects from their parents, but have chose to utilize this information very proactively. and said, okay, well, I have lost 5 family members to breast and ovarian cancer, and I have, young children, and I am not going to die of this disease. What is it that I can do to decrease my risk? And this is a conversation we are having very regularly with our patients. And we will talk a little bit about what we are doing for these patients as well. So there are options. And if you meet any of these criteria, please come forward and undergo genetic counseling. Now, genetic counseling, as I mentioned, is not a hemogram. So Dr. Meenal, what can you tell us about the essential steps when it comes to genetic counseling and testing?
So, Dr. Pranjali, this, as you rightly said, genetic testing is not over-the-counter testing or the kind of an annual screening testing where you directly go to the laboratory without any prescription and say, okay, I want to do my lipid profile, I want to do my sugars testing. Genetic testing involves a complicated process of discussion with between the doctor, counselor, and the family. It involves a complicated genetic testing, and just it does not end there. After the genetic test is out, somebody, a counselor, your doctor, your oncologist needs to explain those results to you and to your family members. Sometimes it is a delicate matter when you do not want to disclose some results to your family members. In those cases also, your counselor helps how to cope up with that anxiety and how to tell those results to your family members. So somebody might wonder, what is this genetic counseling? It's just a discussion, or it's just the kind of a talking between the two individuals. Actually, it involves much more than that. So typically a genetic counseling, if you just say in the simple words, it's just a discussion between the two family members and your counselor or doctors, where they will talk about your risk of breast cancer, whether you should undergo a genetic testing or not. So first of all, probably they will take a detailed family history on both sides. As Dr. Pranjali rightly said, it has to be on both sides, mother sides and father sides. And hereditary genetic risk or hereditary breast cancer risk comes only from one side of the family unless otherwise proved. So it is very important to provide all the details during the counseling sessions. If somebody is affected with breast cancer or related cancer, the related cancer can be ovarian cancer, can be prostate cancer, and really it can be pancreatic cancer as well. So it has to be complete history, and if possible, the review records, the examination findings, the doctor's notes, the biopsy findings, everything might be necessary to determine the risk. Once the doctor or counselor review your medical records, they will discuss with you what is your risk of developing cancer, or what kind of genetic testing you need. Dr. Pranjali in one of the slides shows 3 types of genetic test. One is a limited, only 2 genes test. One is the extended gene testing by NGS about for 20 genes, and third is MLPA. In these counseling sessions, doctor will determine probably which test will be the best for your scenario. They will help you in choosing the right tests. They will also discuss about what will happen in genetic testing. This, how the blood sample or saliva sample will be taken, what will happen to that sample, and how the genetic report will look like. As we are constantly saying, this is not a hemogram or sugar where is only the right and wrong, positive or negative, or normal or abnormal. There is a lot of implication because there are positive, negative, and a considerable number of samples. They do show gray result or an uncertain. We will talk about it in future slides. And also this counseling session will determine who else in your family member needs to get tested. So they will record your complete family history, medical history, and based on that discussion, they will plan out your genetic testing, and they will also tell you the implications, what will happen when the genetic test will be out. So without genetic counseling session, nobody should take a genetic test per se.
Yeah, agree. Thanks, Dr. Meenal. And one point I wanted to make is, we face this situation a lot where a woman may come and say that, my mother had breast cancer, my aunt has breast cancer, my aunt's daughter has breast cancer. And she says, they're all somewhere out of town. I am here. Why don't you take my blood and go ahead and test me? And the first person to test is, I think, critical, right? So in this case, you have usually recommended that no, let's find the person who has had the cancer first and test that person first. So can you tell us a little bit about why we do that?
Yes, absolutely. And very relevant point here, because a woman can be anxious and just tell us the history. Okay, somebody far away has had the cancer. But as we are talking about a genetic test in a family is almost always done for a member who herself or himself is affected with any kind of cancer, because the chances of finding a genetic defect or error is the highest. If sometimes that person is not alive, or sometimes the sample is not cannot be made available, then in those rare circumstances we can test, but the information sometimes will be incomplete and uncertain. So as far as possible, test the family members who is affected. If that is not possible, then we can of course certainly test you, and whatever information we can give you, we will give you.
Yes, and also the one type of testing we did not discuss in that list of types of tests is the focus testing for a known mutation within the family. So if somebody in this group already knows that, okay, my sister is in the US, she had breast cancer, she has tested positive for this specific gene, and now I am over here. Do I need to undergo the whole panel, or can we look specifically whether I have this gene which runs in my family? And that becomes a much simpler, faster, and cheaper method of testing somebody for a known mutation within the family. So I think the testing for the rest of the family members becomes much simpler once we know what gene we're looking for. And also, if somebody has a family member who has cancer, and you're assuming, yes, they have some um, genetic defect that's running in the family, you may not necessarily find it in that family member. So
Yeah.
it's more useful information, like in the case that I described earlier of the mother and daughter, that we found a defect in the mom. And then we've conclusively proven that that defect which runs in the family is not inherited by the daughter. That is way more meaningful information than if we have had tested the daughter directly and said, you don't have the gene. But what does that mean? Is there a gene defect that we simply don't know about in the mom? Is it possible the mom still has the defect which she passed on, not to this daughter, but to a different child? Is it, how does this, and then you can't really counsel the mom's siblings, the brothers, the sisters, the mom's mother if she's alive. How do you're not able to counsel the rest of the family if you don't start this process right. So it's important to bring the right person for the first genetic test into the picture. So also the outcomes of a genetic test. Dr. Meenal, can you tell us about how this is not just, sugar report being either normal or abnormal? Like, what are the possible outcomes? I undergo a genetic test. What could my result mean?
As all of you can see on the slide, there are three different categories of possible outcome of testing. We will focus on the middle one first. The report is negative. Negative means that whatever genes we have tested, it can be 2 genes or it can be 20 genes, the genetic testing has not identified any error, any genetic defects, any mutation in any of those genes. The report just says, okay, what has been tested? We have not detected anything. In this case, your doctor, your oncologist may advise you either to go for a second tier testing, because maybe the first testing was a limited testing, or maybe it did not cover every gene, or he or she can advise you for the routine surveillance program, as she would have done for other population otherwise. So this is the most common, which we find in about 80 to 90% of the cases. The second category, look for the first column, that your report says that a deleterious error or a genetic defect or a mutation has been detected in one of the genes tested. And as we are constantly saying that BRCA 1 and 2 are the most common genes to be affected. And on this, your doctor, your treating oncologist, surgeons will advise you how to go forward, and we will discuss it in the upcoming slides. But now I want to focus on the third column, which is inconclusive. What do I mean with that? In about 1/3 of the cases who we test for a breast cancer genetic hereditary risk, we find something. Something means what? We find an error, we find a spelling mistake, we find a genetic defect, we find a mutation about which we don't have enough information. And here, we don't mean Dr. Pranjali and Dr. Meenal or GenePath. We means globally as a scientific community. So science or published literature or whatever, we do not know how to interpret that error because of the lack of information. So that variant or that defect, that error is reported as a variant of unknown significance or VUS. And there's nothing to be scared about. This is what we found and we wrote in the report. And based on this report, your doctor will probably analyze all those previous records, clinical records, family history, and based on the evidences for this error, they will define what should be your treatment or surveillance program. So please don't get scared when you see this variant of unknown significance or inconclusive finding. It also gives you a lot of information. Definitely it tells you that you are not certainly at high risk, what would have been the case in the BRCA positive women. But yes, this is important to know that you had done it, and whatever we have found, we reported.
And this is also an evolving field, right? So the information we have today, like what is in the basket of VUSs today, is probably less than what it was 10 years ago. And even the VUSs we do find, we report back to the international databases. We participate in that. And that helps the data evolve over time as well. So for somebody who has a VUS today, they should check back with us every couple of years and say, you know, I had this VUS when I tested back in, let's say 2020. Is there something new that we know about this VUS today that we didn't know a couple of years or decades ago? So, but yes, VUSs are not easy. Usually it means I connect a phone call with Dr. Meenal and I say, okay, is the protein function actually being affected by this VUS? Or, you know, do I need to do co-segregation analysis? So yes, there is a whole different pathway that we open up once we find an EUS. It's not easy for us either to tell you that, okay, you know, you did this expensive test and we have no idea what the report means. So, but what happens when, so I usually, you know, at our center at Pune Breast Care, I'm doing the genetic counseling. My staff is doing the actual drawing of the blood. And then the actual blood in a test tube comes to your lab where you do the tough part about actually doing the testing. So what happens at the lab end when you receive a sample for a genetic test for, say, BRCA?
So whenever we receive a sample for a genetic testing like BRCA, so as Dr. Pranjali told, mostly it is done from blood sample, but it can be done from any of your body tissues, and saliva can be the most convenient sample for that too. Right now we are doing this testing from blood, and the blood reaches to the lab. We extract that DNA. DNA is your genetic material. So whatever blood is collected from you, there will be thousands and thousands of cells. Out of those cells, your genetic material is taken out in the form of DNA. And in a solution, it looks like a cotton wool. You can see in the middle image of the upper row. And that DNA is processed inside the lab for this complicated genetic testing. And the test name usually you see on the report is NGS. That is the name of the test that is called as next generation sequencing or DNA sequencing or whatnot. Usually this process takes about 4 to 6 weeks time from the time sample is reached in our lab to the time the report is out. The processing might take 1 week to 10 days, but the analysis of reports, it's what sometimes becomes very difficult for us. You can imagine and you can think about that you have been given a word to search in an encyclopedia. You do not know whether that word exists in the encyclopedia or not. And our encyclopedia is 6 billion letters long. So among these 6 billion letters, we have to find a word, whether it is present or not. If it is present, there is a spelling error or not. If there is a spelling error, whether it is related to your cancer risk or not. So it involves a lot of analysis and interpretations, which is commonly called as a bioinformatic analysis. And when this bioinformatic analysis is complete, we say, and we sometimes I call Dr. Pranjali, oh, I have found this spelling error, which has never been reported, but have been seen in the kind of a triple negative single case breast cancer. Do you think that this patient fits in that scenario? Then she gives me the clinical inputs. So that's why the collaboration between the doctors, the geneticists, the laboratory is very important to help the families in the maximal way. So to help you understand your disease process and the further outcome.
Yeah, very true. So it is a complicated process. So we won't blame you why you take 4 to 6 weeks to give us a report when the other labs send us the report the same evening on our email. So what does a sample genetic report look like? And it looks something like this. So this is this is what a positive BRCA report looks like. But it should actually not be sent directly to you because you're not going to have any idea how to interpret this, what it actually means. It's a lot of complicated jargon. And so the genetics report should ideally come to the treating physician, the oncologist, or the genetic counselor, who then sits across the table from you to explain what this report actually means. Don't try to read these reports and interpret with the help of Google. You're going to be really stressed out. So after the genetic report gets mailed to us, we schedule what we call as a post-test counseling session with our patients. And this is just as critical as the pre-test counseling, because no matter what your report is, you have to realize, firstly, it's not a good or bad report per se, because your genetic material is already what you already have. So now, even if you were to test positive for a known genetic defect, the way to think about it is, well, today you have the power of knowing this genetic information versus not knowing. And how are you actually going to utilize this piece of information to better your own health, to mitigate your cancer risk? How are you going to counsel your family members to take care of themselves? And how do you make them aware of the options available to them? And this is what happens in the post-test counseling. So what we often will do is we look at the report, we review that with the patient very completely transparently. Sometimes there are family members who say, oh, don't tell her, just when it comes to cancer, families are always trying to protect their family members. And no, this is a test that we conduct for a patient who is already well informed, knows she wants to undergo testing, knows how she is going to utilize the information from the genetic test. So the scenarios that Dr. Meenal described, positive report, negative report, VUS, we've already talked in brief to the patients about what we are going to do with this information, what are the options available to them in either case scenario, and now help them actually make choices based on these reports. We give them guidance on how to actually broach the topic with their family members. And sometimes, families are estranged. Sometimes people don't know, should they call this cousin who they don't actually speak to and inform them about their genetics report? And, this is a very delicate matter. And so we counsel them about how they should actually approach this topic, not only from an individual perspective, but also from the family perspective. Now, what happens if a patient, like I said, just because you have cancer doesn't mean you shouldn't undergo testing, because there is a lot of difference it's going to make if you are a breast cancer patient and we pick up a BRCA mutation in you. How does it make a difference? Well, it may change the type of systemic therapy, or what we call as chemotherapy, that we give to a BRCA patient compared to a non-BRCA patient. So if you've not been treated with platinums, your oncologist may add this group of drugs, which have been shown to be very helpful in achieving a good response in BRCA mutation carriers. There is a specific group of drugs that is now available called PARP inhibitors that work beautifully in BRCA mutated cells, which are cancerous. So you are now actually using this genetic defect to actually kill cancer cells with this special group of drugs. So it's a really brilliant and smart therapy option. From a surgeon perspective, now this happens a lot in my practice, where when a young breast cancer patient, somebody's firstly, yes, you can get breast cancer in your 20s and 30s. A lot of women don't know that. But when I get a young breast cancer patient, let's say a woman is 30 years old, she has a tumor that, let's say, developed while she was breastfeeding, or um, even after she has completed family. But she's 35, she has a 5-6 centimeter lump, and I may choose in this patient to give her chemotherapy before surgery. There are several reasons to do that. In advanced cancers, it's helpful from a prognosis standpoint to have the chemotherapy done before surgery. We may achieve shrinkage of the tumor, where instead of doing a complete mastectomy for removal of the breast, we may be able to preserve the breast. And the third advantage is, in a young patient, chemotherapy before surgery buys me time for doing genetic testing. Because by the time it's time for surgery, it may have been a couple of weeks where I've had the chance to do the genetic counseling, genetic testing. The genetics lab has had a chance to look at the details that Dr. Meenal just mentioned and give us a report about whether this young breast cancer patient has developed breast cancer at young age because of a genetic defect. And in that case, I may give this patient an option of, okay, if she has done well in terms of response to the current treatment for the current breast cancer, we can discuss what we can do to prevent future breast cancers. And one of the things I mentioned, the landscape is changing. What is also changing is, with better treatments, breast cancer patients are actually doing better. They're living longer, they're living to normal lifespans. And if that is what we expect, then we want to be able to tell this patient, okay, once you are treated completely for this breast cancer, obviously we're going to keep you in surveillance, regular follow up. But how do we prevent you, after having gone through all these treatments, how do we prevent a second breast cancer from developing in your opposite breast? How do we protect you from an ovarian cancer, which may develop, 2 years from now, 20 years from now? And that this is where a woman may decide, and this happens routinely in our practice, that a woman may decide, you know what, instead of just doing this little lumpectomy, although my tumor has responded well, I would much prefer to get both breasts removed and replaced in the same setting, what we call as a nipple skin sparing mastectomy with immediate reconstruction. I know it sounds a complicated name, but what it essentially means is replacing the entire breast tissue that we can. And this is the most effective way to reduce risk of future breast cancers for this patient. We're not talking about the current cancer they have. We're already doing what we can for those cancers by giving them chemotherapy, radiation, doing the surgery that they need. We're talking about new cancer development and what we can do to prevent that. There have been patients where we have done this procedure in at the same time as what we call as a bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, which is removal of the tubes and ovaries. As Dr. Meenal mentioned, if you have a BRCA positive patient, their risk of increased cancers is not only in the breast, but also in the ovaries and the fallopian tubes. So we have had patients of breast cancer being treated for breast cancer, but when they're undergoing surgery, once they have the genetic information, they choose to undergo a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction and this salpingo-oophorectomy operation in the same setting. Now, this may not be the right option for each patient. Some patient may not have, not hasn't had the opportunity to think about it long enough. She wants to finish treatment of her current cancer first. She may think about the preventive surgery for the other cancers at a later time. For these patients, we need to keep them in a higher surveillance or a more intense surveillance regimen compared to routine follow-up for their breast cancer. What that means is, for typical breast cancer patients, we may say, okay, see us every 3 to 6 months for the first 2 years. Then we go on to, okay, see us once a year with your annual mammogram of the operated breast as well as the opposite breast. Whereas for a BRCA mutation carrier, we may recommend that, this annual mammography is not going to be enough of a strategy. We need to do something more because your risk of developing breast cancer is way higher, even between mammograms, what we call as interval cancers. And these patients, we do once a year MRIs and once a year mammograms, but we stagger them to where you're getting one investigation every 6 months. So if you get a mammogram today, you get an MRI of the breast in 6 months, then you get a mammogram again in 6 months, then you get an MRI again in 6 months. Now, this sounds very, very invasive and intense. And these women are obviously very anxious every time they're going for one of these tests. It's like, okay, is it happened already? Now this strategy of increased surveillance helps with early detection of a cancer that can develop. It cannot prevent a cancer from happening. This is a common misconception. Women often think, well, I'm getting mammograms. How come I got a cancer? Well, mammogram is not a preventive strategy. It's something that actually helps you pick up a cancer early so that your threat to life from that cancer is mitigated because you've caught it early. So the same strategy applies to increased surveillance in BRCA mutation carriers. If they do this regularly, they can pick up a new cancer early. And also, even if it's a breast cancer patient who already has a complete treatment strategy, let's say she's not going to change her choice of surgery or chemotherapy with testing, it may still be very relevant to her family members who now better know how to take care of themselves. Now, this is more for our doctors here in this group. I'm just showing you an example of, we have certain tools now which can help us quantify what the risk is. Just telling a patient that, yeah, for the opposite side, you can either continue surveillance or you can undergo surgery. A woman needs to know what exactly this means as far as her risk of cancer on the opposite side or risk of cancer in the ovary is concerned. And this is a calculator. This is referenced from Ask Me. It's a software available online. This is not for use directly by patients. This is something that we use, that is used by your oncologist and used to then guide you with certain numbers. But if you look at this tool, let's say I'm looking at a 37-year-old who I'm treating for a left breast cancer. I've completed her chemotherapy. Now I want to plan her surgery. Now I've helped her undergo genetic testing and she's tested positive for the BRCA gene. So what can we do to this particular, what can we tell this patient about her risk of future breast cancer? Now, if you look at the graph at the bottom, what the word contralateral means, cancer on the opposite side. So let's say on the left side, even if she were to undergo a complete mastectomy, removal of complete breast tissue with or without a reconstruction, what is the risk that she will develop a breast cancer on the opposite side because she has the BRCA gene? And this risk varies depending on the age of the patient. So it's going to be very different for a 37-year-old who I expect to live to the age of 80 versus a 65-year-old. So, and this graph helps us. So if you look at this age column, so at the age of 60, her risk of having developed a breast cancer on the opposite side is almost 60%. If she lives to the age of 85, it's way over 80%. So these are not absolute numbers. For the patient, it's going to be a all or none phenomena. But what the statistics helps us to quantify is, okay, if I had 100 patients with this exact genetic makeup and this cancer type of this specific age, how many of them are going to develop a breast cancer on the opposite side by a certain age? And the graph at the top talks about ovarian cancer risk. And the dotted line here, green, is in a patient who does not have the BRCA gene. So you see how the risk of ovarian cancer is very, very low for a person who is not a carrier of the gene, versus for a patient who is a carrier of the gene, the risk increases with age. And if she is of the age of, like, let's say at the age of 60, it may be closer to 30%. At the age of 85, it's well above 60% for ovarian cancer risk. So once this is explained to her, she may change the decision about what kind of surgery she wants to undergo for her current breast cancer, which is in the picture. There are similar risk calculators for somebody who has not had breast cancer yet. What is their lifetime risk of developing breast cancer? What is their lifetime risk of developing ovarian cancer? It may be different for a patient who has a BRCA1 mutation versus a BRCA2 mutation. So what do we do for patients who are carriers of the disease but don't have cancer? So we've had family members, like I talked to you about, like, women who have had, let's say the mom had breast cancer. Maybe the mom didn't have breast cancer, but a paternal aunt had breast cancer, which means atya or bua, as you call it. She's just as important as your mausi. You need to remember that. So let's say your paternal aunt had breast cancer, paternal grandmother had breast cancer, the paternal aunt's daughter had ovarian cancer. You have a similar picture. Now this aunt or your cousin, somebody has undergone a genetic test. They've tested positive for a BRCA gene mutation. You undergo the test and you have the same gene that runs in your family. You haven't had cancer yet. What are your options at that point? So in this post test counseling session, what we do for you is help you quantify your risk based on these some of these calculators that we have that help us quantify the risk. Discuss what are your options for risk reduction. Now, as we've pointed out, your risk of developing breast and ovarian cancer over your lifetime is significantly raised compared to a woman who does not have a BRCA gene. So your risk of breast cancer may be as high as 60 to 80%. Your risk of developing ovarian cancer may be as high as 30 to 60%. And what can you do to mitigate this risk? And today, the only point of testing is because we have tools to mitigate this risk. So one option, yes, we can continue the high risk surveillance strategy that we talked about. So, you know, you can't start mammography at the age of 40 and do it once a year. You need to start your breast exams way early, closer to the age of 25. Start doing self exams, annual clinical exams, which is exams done by a doctor once a year. We start doing annual MRIs because in young breast cancer, young patients, mammography is not a very helpful tool. So if you're trying to look for a breast cancer in a 25, 30-year-old with a mammogram, you're not going to find it because the breast tissue is so dense that X-rays don't penetrate well at that age. So which is why we use annual MRIs starting at the age of as early as 25 for a patient who is a BRCA mutation carrier. And some sort of imaging is being done every 6 months. Now, this is hectic. It can make a person very, very anxious. But yet, this is the only thing that we have as an alternate to surgery, which may be life-saving by picking up cancers early. As far as the ovarian cancer risk is concerned, ovarian cancer is very difficult to pick up early because you can't feel a lump in the ovary from the outside. But one can do pelvic ultrasounds or what is called as an ovarian cancer marker is a test called CA125. It can be done once a year, but it is not a very effective tool for early detection of all types of ovarian cancer. So, which is why most women who understand their risk may choose to undergo a preventive surgery. Now, like I said, preventive surgery has also evolved very dramatically over the last couple of years to where a breast replacement surgery is no longer a mutilating surgery. It is not a mastectomy where a woman is walking around flat chested. And, when Angelina Jolie had spoken about her surgery, you may have read that story. When she first spoke about it, she did a great service to all women, at least to raise attention to the issue of BRCA mutations and the importance of these genes and the options of surgical risk reduction available to women. But a lot of Indian women, misinterpreted that as one of those crazy things that happens in Hollywood. It is not true. This was a very valid indication of doing a preventive surgery. Her mother had had a certain type of breast cancer, which was a triple negative breast cancer, for which she had undergone testing. She was conclusively proven to have the gene. Her daughter, who was Angelina Jolie, tested positive for the same gene and then decided to undergo what we call as a skin sparing mastectomy with reconstruction to eliminate that risk. And she also underwent a ovarian surgery, which is the salpingo-oophorectomy part, to decrease her risk of ovarian cancer. And that was a very proactive step to do. Surgery today, as such, in general anesthesia, surgery has evolved to be so much safer than it has been in preceding decades. The technique of surgery has evolved, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And it's also important, even if you are an asymptomatic carrier, we talk about this in the context of corona, that even if you are asymptomatic, you are at risk of transmitting it to your own blood relatives. So it's important for asymptomatic carriers to bring in their family members into the discussion as well. Another point is, it's not just women who should be concerned about breast and ovarian cancer and who should undergo testing. Supposing a woman has a BRCA mutation and she has a brother. Yes, that brother very well might have inherited the same gene from the parents as well, and might transmit the gene to his daughters and his sons who may be at risk of specific cancers as well. So if a man tests positive for a breast cancer gene or the BRCA gene, he is advised certain precautionary steps as well. So we don't usually do preventive surgeries in men for BRCA mutations, but they need to be made aware of the fact that men often don't know that men can develop breast cancer. And in the context of BRCA mutations, becomes specifically important to counsel men that yes, you need to do self exams as well. You need to annually see your physician or surgeon or breast surgeon or oncologist, whoever it may be, so that they can perform an annual clinical breast exam. You need to undergo regular screening for prostate cancer as well. And yes, you need to bring in your genetically related, um, next of kin into the testing algorithm as well. So, and yes, men can develop breast cancer, and all male breast cancers should undergo genetic counseling and testing. Now, the next slide that I'm going to talk about, and this may not be appropriate for all audiences to view, they are pictures of surgical pictures of patients who have undergone a preventive mastectomy with reconstruction. And I debated whether I should put this up, but I think this is very important because this is one of the first images that a woman actually needs to see even before she has undergone um, genetic counseling. So, or in fact, during the genetic counseling, when we are discussing, okay, you've clearly understood that you have a high risk family history, you have a breast cancer, or you may not have a breast cancer, but if you do test positive for this gene, and you do decide to undergo preventive surgery, what does that actually look like? What does a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy look like? And this is what a bilateral mastectomy can look like. And this picture is important for you to see because, yes, different women have different body habitus, but we can today create a new breast structure for them based on their own physique and body type. These are pictures of actual patients who have had either breast cancer or not had breast cancer, but have undergone a preventive mastectomy. And the complete breast has been reconstructed in all these 4 cases, either using an implant or the patient's own tissues, what we call as a autologous or a flap reconstruction. What we do in these cases, I do these cases with my plastic surgery colleagues. I don't know if Dr. Swapna Athole has joined the group today. And what we usually do is either we use tissue from the patient's back muscles or the lower abdomen, which often gets lax and loose, especially after women have had children. There is some loose tissue on the tummy, and that can be used to beautifully reconstruct a breast. So if a woman can look like this after undergoing a preventive mastectomy, this becomes a no-brainer for somebody who is still contemplating, okay, well, should I undergo a preventive surgery or not? Because a woman's completeness, femininity is preserved by doing these type of breast replacement surgeries. So this is something that I wanted you all to be aware of. Now, a woman may not be ready to undergo this preventive surgery for the breast, and she may elect to undergo a regular screening. Now, this is an example of a woman who chose exactly that. She had been treated for a breast cancer in the past when she was not offered genetic counseling and testing. She had undergone breast conservation where only part of the breast tissue had been removed, the rest of the breast had been radiated. And she said, okay, I'm completely comfortable doing this regular every 6 months mammogram and MRI now that I know I have a BRCA mutation. She came to us much later, several years after she had undergone surgery and met criteria for testing. So we tested her and she elected to undergo the surveillance strategy. So now here what we're looking at in the picture on the right side of the screen, what you see, the blob of white is actually a early cancer that has been picked up on an MRI. 6 months before this MRI, her mammogram was completely normal. So she has a report of a normal mammogram 6 months before this MRI, which then picked up this tumor. Now, after this tumor was picked up though, we realized this is again a triple negative tumor. It does need chemotherapy. The patient still has to undergo a second surgery. And so early detection doesn't prevent you from completing treatment for the cancer that you will pick up, essentially. But this is a strategy that somebody may adopt and is fine, and you have to respect that. Now, Dr. Meenal, coming back to you, you are a gynecologist by training who is now a geneticist. So what about preventive surgery for the ovarian cancer risk? What is actually done during this surgery? And I know we have a couple of gynecologists who are attending this session too, so this will be relevant to them because we often do the breast surgery part and refer to our gynec colleagues to do the ovarian risk reduction.
Yeah, so most of the points you have already covered, Dr. Pranjali, but just to highlight a couple of them more. So the surgery of fallopian tubes and ovary, so I am talking about both ovary and fallopian tubes, not just ovary, can easily be done by laparoscopically nowadays as an outpatient procedure sometimes, not as massive as the preventive mastectomy, number one. Number two, as we are talking about since the beginning of this session, that the carriers for the BRCA mutation or a genetics risk that apply to many organs in the body, including breast, ovary, fallopian tube, peritoneum, pancreas, prostate. But because the removal of ovary and fallopian tube, number one, provide the preventive advantage for these cancers. Second, this is easily performed by laparoscopy. And third, which has not been highlighted till now, that removal of ovaries provides more than 90% of protection from the breast cancers also. So your doctor and oncologist might advise you to complete your family as soon as possible, mostly by age of 35 years, because the ovarian cancers start rising significantly after that. And then you can undergo a prophylactic bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy by a laparoscopy. Another thing that Dr. Pranjali also emphasized, that for the breast cancer screening surveillance, we have effective options available, mammo, MRI. But for ovarian cancer, we have only limited options. One is an ultrasound, and second is a blood test, which tests for a CA-125. Taken together, the sensitivity of these two tests is not more than 30%. What does that mean? It means even if we screen in women at risk by these two tests, about 50 to 70% of ovarian cancer will be missed in the early stages, and the purpose of screening is defeated. So this is a very strongly recommended suggestion or a preventive surgery to all carriers who are carrying mutation of any of these harmful genes, which can be easily done by laparoscopy.
And one of the points I think I didn't harp on enough, because I come from the bias of being a breast surgeon myself, that ovarian cancer is also an indication for testing for BRCA mutations. And I think
yes,
one point which is neglected a lot. There are these epithelial ovarian cancers, right? Dr. Meenal, you can tell us a little bit more about what those are. But if you've had ovarian cancer and no risk and no history of breast cancer, you still meet criteria for genetic counseling to see if you should undergo genetic testing.
Yes, that's true, Dr. Pranjali. All ovarian cancers, epithelial ovarian cancer, should undergo testing for BRCA genes, both in somatic, it means your cancer tissue and blood tissues, because taken together in almost 35 to 50% of them, they carry one of the mutations in BRCA1 and BRCA2. That can be helpful for their own treatment, for the targeted therapy like PARP2 inhibitors, and also in about 10 to 15% of the cases, we're likely to get a germline. Germline means a hereditary, a genetic or intrinsic defect that can be applied to your extended family. Absolutely.
Thank you. And in an asymptomatic carrier, we often stagger these preventive surgeries. So women who want to undergo both the ovarian surgery as well as the breast surgery, but somebody may not, the ovarian surgery usually becomes a no-brainer in young patients who are like, let's say somebody's 37 years old, has finished the family. Undergoing a laparoscopic procedure does not seem as much of a big deal as the breast procedure. So often we will refer these patients for the ovarian aspect of the surgery first. But even then, my plastic surgeon and I will often talk to the gynecologist ahead of time, like, wherever you're going to place your incision points for the laparoscopy may actually make it easier or difficult for us to do a future reconstruction. So this is a team effort. Like, we are usually, thinking a couple of steps ahead, that, okay, if we're going to reconstruct the breast using tissue from the lower abdomen, we don't want to damage blood supply of that lower abdominal fat while you are actually doing this laparoscopic surgery. So that becomes a really a team and collaborative effort when these surgeries are being planned and done, and which is why it's important to do this as part of a program that is experienced and dedicated to this process. So the other option that is often discussed in risk reduction is women often ask, well, can't you just give me medicines that will reduce my risk if I have a BRCA mutation? There are certain drugs which have been shown in prevention, in in being effective in prevention of breast cancers in general in women who are at high risk of developing breast cancer. But specifically in BRCA mutations, there is very limited data on how effective these drugs are. These drugs act, as some of you may know, that tamoxifen acts by blocking estrogen receptors at the tissue level. And we know that a lot of BRCA1 mutation carriers have actually triple negative disease, receptor negative disease, that is not going to get affected by tamoxifen. Also, we're not going to put people on tamoxifen for 20 years because that comes with its own set of complications. So yes, there are drugs which may be helpful, but to a limited extent. And generally, the strategy that is the most bang for the buck, the most effective way of preventing cancers in BRCA mutation carriers is going to be a risk-reducing surgery. So I think we've covered a very vast topic in the limited amount of time we have. And for those of you who have questions that have not been, answered, you can feel free to reach us directly. I'm going to check if we have any questions in the chat window here, and we'll take some of those as may be feasible. So we are not going to take any questions which talk about your own individual family history. So if you want to discuss, your family members and your family history risk, I would request you to please schedule a genetic counseling testing questions with us. Dr. Meenal, there is one question. Are these breast cancer genes present only on like an X chromosome or a specific chromosome?
No, actually, none of these genes resides on X chromosomes. All those 20 genes we are talking about, they are situated on non-X chromosome. Among BRCA1 and BRCA2, they are chromosome number 13 or 17. So it does not have anything to do with the male and female, but because females have breast and ovaries, they are at higher risk for those cancers. That's all.
And so another patient is asking, I have breast cancer, should I undergo genetic testing? You have participants muted. So if a patient has been diagnosed with breast cancer, whether you should undergo genetic testing or not, yes, you can undergo genetic testing while you're still taking your chemo. Usually we draw the blood sample before a chemo session. But even if there is no family history, there are certain indications where we do advise genetic testing, especially if you have young breast cancer diagnosed below the age of 50, if you have triple negative breast cancer diagnosed before the age of 60. And in all others, it really comes down to an individual decision. So a lot of these criteria which have been developed for genetic testing have been developed with a view of, okay, where is the most bang for the buck? Where is the most likelihood of picking up genetic mutation? So the likelihood of picking up a breast cancer mutation in somebody who is, over the age of 65, has a ER positive cancer, has no family history, is probably, 2.5%, much less than 5%. Is it zero? No. If that individual woman comes to me and says that, if my risk is even 1%, I actually want to know, is it wrong to test her? What do you think, Dr. Meena?
No, absolutely. Any woman, even if they are not having breast cancer, even in any healthy woman, has a right to get herself tested for BRCA1 or BRCA2, because I think these guidelines were put initially not to burden the laboratory, because not much enough information was available how to interpret those spelling mistakes or genetic defect. Now in the era when genetic testing is widely available, anybody and everybody can go for a genetic testing only after counseling sessions and understanding the consequences. Absolutely.
Okay, are there any other burning questions that, there's a question, how do we minimize the chances, this is from one of our oncologists, Dr. Kulkarni, how do we minimize the chances of finding a VUS? Like,
so Dr. Kulkarni,
does it make a difference which test we are asking for? Like if I order a whole extended NGS panel with MLPA, with everything, does my likelihood of finding a VUS go down?
So Dr. Kulkarni, if the financials or economics are permitting, I would say go for every test possible because it will give you a comprehensive information, NGS plus MLPA. If there is some financial constraints, then stepwise can be taken. First is the limited testing for BRCA1 and BRCA2 sequencing, and followed by extended sequencing or MLPA. Third, your question is how do we minimize the chance of VUS? I think only by providing the complete family details of every affected family members and the clinical reports, the biopsy finding, the ERPR status, everything, probably that is the only thing which will minimize. But in most of the cases, generally it is said that 1/3 of the cases we will find VUS. And as Dr. Pranjali said, if you are ordering only for a BRCA1 and BRCA2, the chances of getting a VUS is slightly less, simply because we have enough information available about those two genes. If you have ordered for an expanded testing for 20 genes, the chances of finding in VUS are kind of higher, maybe go up to the 30 to 40%, just because we don't have enough information available.
And often when women are planning for breast cancer treatments, the priority is given to making sure there is good, safe surgery, there is adequate, finances being directed to chemotherapy, radiation, and genetic testing often assumes the back burner. So we are, as an organization, I'm also a co-founder and director of an organization, an NGO called iShare Foundation. If you or anybody you know would like to donate to the cause of helping needy breast cancer patients procure testing, or for that matter, treatment in general, please, we request you to make a donation to our organization, which will help us get access for genetic testing to as many patients as needed without consideration for financial constraints. At our center, Pune Breast Care is an independent, comprehensive breast disease care center where we are doing not only oncology, but also diagnostic testing with breast ultrasound, image-guided biopsy. We are doing genetic counseling and testing. It's a brand new center. We're following all COVID-related precautions. Yet in this atmosphere, a lot of women who are thinking about this issue don't necessarily want to come to the center to get information on genetic testing. So you will find a lot of information on our website as well under our services tab under genetic testing. And feel free to call us on our number or WhatsApp on this number, and we can set up a teleconsultation with either me or Dr. Meenal as our time permits to complete a session of pre-test counseling where you can at least get more information about whether genetic testing is something that is right for you. Is it something that you should consider, whether it's warranted, who should be tested first, what would be the procedure, the right type of test that should be done, and then you can schedule the actual test at convenience, which then goes much quicker because then the matter of testing is simply about a blood draw because you've completed the counseling, both pre and post counseling sessions online. So that is very much an option that is available to all that are here and considering the testing in this COVID atmosphere. So with that, I want to thank everybody who joined this session. For those of you who were not able to join live or who had to leave before, we are recording this session and we'll make it available to you on our YouTube channel as well. So thanks again for sparing time on a Sunday morning, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who have attended here. Thanks, Dr. Meenal. That was lovely.
Thanks to Pranjali and everybody else. It's always a learning session. Every time I do such sessions with you, I have always something to learn from you and everybody else. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.